Every so often, Leica releases a new M series camera, and generally speaking, the updates are quite incremental. They're less upgrades and more of a refinement of the series. Recently, Leica released the M10-R, which is what I've got in my hand, and this camera is all about the resolution. This is a 40 megapixel full frame camera, so it has more resolution than many of the medium format cameras that Leica produces. So we're in Leeds today, and we decided we're going to test this camera out, take a few shots, but also do a unscientific, relatively unfair comparison against the Fuji X-T3 with the 23 f2 and the Sony a7R III with the 28 f2. So let's test these cameras out and see what they're all about. So first impressions with the M10R, and compared to the Sony and the Fuji, it's far more difficult in comparison. For one, it doesn't have fancy features like eye detect, autofocus, or any of that nonsense. I mean, it doesn't even have autofocus, so you have to shoot completely manual with this. The focus is manual, the aperture is manual, everything about this camera is completely manual. But there is this really nice tactile feeling about it. The viewfinder, it's a rangefinder camera, meaning that when you look through it, you're not seeing what the lens is seeing. I mean, the viewfinder does have some frame lines which help you compose, but it's not ideal. And also, even when you focus, the focus mechanism of the viewfinder, or the split prism mechanism, is only in the center, meaning that every time you focus, if you're not framing exactly in the center, you have to focus and recompose. So you can misfocus. It's a lot easier to misfocus with this camera than it is with the Sony and the Fuji. And even when you're shooting in live view, it's not perfect. I mean, it's a lot better if you want more accurate focus. But ideally, you know, the Sony and the Fuji are better in that regard. However, I love shooting with the Leica because it's just something about it. I mean, sure, the Fuji has those manual knobs and dials and so on, and it is enjoyable to shoot with, but it's just not quite the same as it is with the Leica. And the images, now we're just looking on the back of the screen at the moment, so Annette and I haven't been able to properly judge the quality of the results, but just looking at the back of the screen, the Leica seems to be producing much better looking results, especially the colors, compared to the Sony and the Fuji. And Fuji is known for colors, but Leica's doing a heck of a lot of a better job so far. So the other thing I really dislike about the M series cameras, or the more modern M series cameras I should say, is the ergonomics. Ergonomics on this camera are horrendous. Like, there's no grip. There's nowhere really for my fingers to properly rest. I mean, sure, on the back there's like a little thumb rest, but it's not doing a great deal. And also, my little finger is constantly underneath the camera, meaning that the edge of the camera is always digging in. So after a little while, it's getting very uncomfortable. And Sony and Fuji, those two cameras, I mean, they're not known for being brilliant in terms of ergonomics, but they are leagues ahead of the M10 in that regard. Despite this, I'm still thoroughly enjoying shooting with the M10R. There's just this really nice tactile feeling about it, and I really love that about the Leica series cameras. I can't say that they're worth the money, but they're very enjoyable to shoot with. And once again, looking at the back of the screens of all three cameras, Annette and I both feel like the Leica images look better. However, we still need to look at them on a larger screen, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to hop into Lightroom now, we're going to compare them side by side and see what the results actually look like when we're not looking at these tiny LCDs. So here we have the images opened up in Lightroom now, and the first couple of images that we're looking at are from the Sony and the Fuji. And if we're just looking back and forth between the two, in my view, colors from the Fuji tend to look much better. And the only changes that I've made have been to the camera profile. I tried to pick a camera profile that worked for the Sony, and the only camera profile that worked for the Sony was camera neutral. The rest of them looked pretty poor. They had this like weird yellow cast to it. I picked Astia for the Fujifilm, and I mean, Provia could have been an option, but Provia just had quite a heavy magenta cast. I didn't like that. I think Astia did a better job. And between the two, you know, the Sony has a shallower depth of field, but the Fuji just tends to look a little bit better. And as I said, Fuji's known for great colors. Compared to Sony, I'm going to say Fuji does a better job. However, when you put the Fuji image next to the Leica, in my view and in Annette's view, we both thought the Leica image looked way better. And we did stop down the lens a little bit just to kind of get the depth of field close-ish, but still, the way that the 35mm renders the scene just looks beautiful to me. And even the lens flare, some of you might think it's too much, but I really like the way the lens is flaring in this one, and the way that the lens renders the background. Like, it just, honestly, it's got this like dreamlike look to it, and I absolutely love it. And you know, when you compare it to Sony, the Leica just looks amazing. Colors just look beautiful. The way that the greens and the earthy tones are rendered, I properly love it. I mean, her hair looks way better in the Leica image than it does in the Sony image. And the Sony image has got this almost like a gingery kind of look, but that's not what her hair looks like. Annette's hair is better represented on the Leica than it is on the Sony. And I mean, the thing is, the Leica isn't even that sharp. Like, it's not a sharp lens. The Sony is clearly the much sharper lens, picks up way more detail in comparison, but it's not about sharpness. Like, that detail is completely irrelevant, because the way that the Leica lens and camera renders the scene, it's a combination, in my view, of the camera profile and the lens. It just looks stunning. Like, again, look at the way it renders the background. It just looks beautiful. I mean, even compared to the Fuji lens, the Leica is softer in comparison, and the Fuji isn't known for being a sharp lens, but still, it doesn't really matter. Like, their sharpness makes very little difference, because the overall scene and the way that the image looks, that's what really matters. And honestly, the Leica does an incredible job. Fuji does a much better job in terms of the hair color, but it's still not quite right. And the Leica does a significantly better job with like the hair color, the skin tones, the background color. Everything just looks almost dreamlike, and I absolutely love it. For this next scene, you can see how each camera rendered the image, and the colors on the Sony are a little bit muted. I did pick camera neutral, but again, camera neutral looked the best in comparison to all the others, because all the others had this weird color cast that I really didn't like. Fuji does a good job, and Sony looks okay, but when you put it next to the Leica, it's just a complete different scene. Like, Leica, again, in my view, does a way better job with the colors. Like, this over here, it just looks a little harsh. Like, the colors don't match what I saw. And Leica does a much better job getting the scene correct. The hair, again, hair color's better and more accurate. The background scene is better. And also, even the greens look more accurate as well. Like, this has slightly like a colder, this looks a little bit colder, but that's not really what it was supposed to be. Leica does a better job. Again, all I've done is change the camera profile to something that looks the best on all the other cameras, but with Leica, I just left it with the Leica profile. White balance I left the same, but I am going to show you the white balance differences in the next set of images. Compared to the Sony, I think Sony does a better job compared to the Fuji in this particular scene, but if we zoom in, you can see that Leica still has, I mean, look at the background, look at the colors. Like, this is kind of leaning a little bit too much into the magentas, and that's why it's, you know, changing the color tones quite a bit more. But Leica still, again, does a better job, and Sony still has that blue cold shift to the greens that the Fuji had as well. Hair color is better in this scene, but still not quite as good as Leica. Honestly, Leica, there's something about the color profile that just looks amazing, and I think that's what makes Leica images stand out amongst the crowd. So one of the common arguments that people make when it comes to color science and so on is that if you shoot in RAW, it doesn't matter because you can just correct it with white balance. Honestly, it doesn't make a difference. That's what most people say. But that is not true, because if I put these images side by side, Fuji and the Leica, you can see some noticeable differences. And they've both been corrected. The white balance has been corrected based on the color checker, and this is not like the cheap color checker passport. This is the color checker digital SG. Quite a bit more expensive. This is the pro version of it. And a couple of things. First thing is, I don't know if this is going to come across on YouTube, but I can clearly see them, and I will make these images available. So the wood on the background, there's just this magenta shift on the Fuji, which I know that's not what it looks like because I've got it here in my home. And if you zoom into the colors, like look at the red tones over here, like the Fuji lens is way sharper. There's no doubt about that. Wide open, Fuji way sharper in comparison to the Leica. But we're looking at colors. Like, look at the colors. Like, look at how much more vibrant the red tones are in comparison to the Fuji. Like, there's a distinct difference between this color and this color, but over here it's not as much. Even the purples and magentas. Like, look at how much more vibrant the Leica is. And if we're looking at these skin tone colors over here, the Fuji's are a little bit colder, and this is one of the problems. Even the greens, the Leica does a better job. And you know, it's not even about being accurate, it's just the fact that, I mean, I don't think that the Leica is incredibly accurate. Like, I don't think it's perfect in any regard, but what I think is that the images that the Leica produces just have this certain character and this certain look to them, and the colors are making a big difference in comparison to a lot of other cameras that I've shot. Put it next to the Sony, and you know, the difference is very noticeable. Again, I have corrected the white balance on this image using the color checker, and correcting the white balance does not fix the issues. Look at how yellow the wood is. That does not look great. And this is with the color checker. This is the correct white balance based on the scene, and it doesn't look great. It looks pretty poor. It looks a little unnatural. And you know, you're not gonna, here's the thing, when you're looking at images from the Sony camera individually, you won't notice them because you haven't got a point of reference. You haven't got another image to compare it to. But when you look at them compared to another camera that does seemingly a better job, that's when you start picking out the differences, and that's when you start noticing the poor results, or the poorer results, I should say. I mean, anyway you look, the Sony, yes, the lens is a lot sharper in comparison to the Leica, but the colors are just not that great in comparison. So here's the thing, Leica M series cameras are by far the most impractical cameras that I have ever shot with. It doesn't have autofocus, the viewfinder makes it difficult for you to find focus and also compose your shot correctly. The ergonomics suck, it has a single card slot, the battery life is relatively poor, it doesn't have any video features, and it costs more than pretty much any other full frame camera currently on the market. In any logical sense, this camera is ridiculous. However, I love shooting with it. Honestly, it's the most fun I've ever had compared to any other camera that I've ever shot with. And I love my Fuji cameras like the X100, the X-T3, I love shooting with them, but it's just not the same as shooting with the M10. And you know, the lenses, like if you compare the 35mm f2 to any relatively inexpensive lens like the 28 f2 or the 23 f2 that I shot with, those two smaller inexpensive lenses will produce way sharper results in any situation. They're much faster at focusing, and the detail and clarity that they pick up is way more than the 35mm f2. I mean, 35mm f2 looks mushy at best, but I still love the results that the M10R with the 35mm f2 was producing. And anytime I showed images from the Leica on the back of the screen, or even like when I'm sending images out to people because I was shooting with like a bunch of my friends, anytime I showed them images from the Leica, everyone seemed to prefer the Leica images. Now, as nice as the images are from the Leica, I'm not going to be using it for professional work anytime soon. I mean, I do use the Sony and Fuji for my actual work, but I'm not going to be using the Leica because it's not really a practical camera. But that's also not what it's really about. It's not about good value for money or being practical or anything to that extent. I mean, let's be honest, it's a luxury camera. It's kind of like jewelry, and people buy it because they like it and they want it, and most importantly, they can afford it. Anyway, just want to say thank you so much for watching our video. If you like this video, hit the like button, please subscribe, share this video, and make sure you check out our new store on the website. It really does help support the channel, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thank you.